Well, welcome everybody to this second edition of the virtual seminar series. First, please let me start by acknowledging country. So we acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. Then second, some rules. Please mute your audio just so that we don't have any background noises during the presentation. But to still keep this as interactive as possible, please, if you have a question, just write your name in the chat box, or well, you can also write your question if you want to. Then we'll organize Q&A breaks during the presentation, and then I will give you the word. So I'm kind of moderating who's talking so that your questions will be answered. If you have urgent clarification questions, please don't hesitate to either write urgent or just interrupt us. We don't want anyone to be left behind. And then the last part from me is, well, welcome Ioana. Ioana is a research fellow and lecturer in charge at the Center for Social Impact here at UNSW. She has done her PhD in social science at UNSW as well, and worked in the private consultant industry before joining UNSW again. Her research is mainly focused on the interaction between well-being and social policy, so policy related to work, education, health, for example. And as said before, she has experience both in academic consultant, but also in private consultancy regarding working together with state government, regarding well-being. And I think today, it was planned that both Ioana and Mălina would present, but unfortunately only Ioana can join us. But anyways, please, Ioana, the floor is all yours, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Inka. Hi, everyone. Well, thank you for joining today in the webinar series. I'm very happy to be presenting. I was supposed to present much later on, I think, but technology is on our side, and I was hoping, as Inka said, that my co-author would join us today from Bucharest, Romania. Unfortunately, she had a family emergency that she had to attend to, and she's no longer able to do that. Although she did say that she very much looks forward to listening to the recording and to hear all your questions and background. So on behalf of myself and Dr. Mălina Voicu from the Research Institute for Quality of Life from the Romanian Academy, I'll be presenting our study on subjective well-being among older Europeans, and we'll be looking at the role of active aging. This research we've conducted last year, and we've submitted this to an international journal, and is currently under review. So we're starting with some definitions and conceptualization of active aging and aging in general in Europe. So by 2030, 1 in 4 people in the European Union will be over 65, and 1 in 8 will be over 75. This means that there will be challenges at individual and societal levels. And throughout the past decade or even longer, the policy response in Europe has been active aging, which has been defined by the World Health Organization as the process of optimizing opportunities for health, participation, and security in order to enhance quality of life as people age. Then takes us to what is quality of life and how do you define it. And there is a whole body of literature around this. And of course, the use and the interaction of terms such as quality of life, well-being, subjective well-being. So quality of life has started being measured as objective quality of life through economic indicators such as GDP per capita, and objective social indicators as these indicators evolved a little bit. And such objective social indicators have been, for example, unemployment rate or literacy. So all of them measure quality of life in different aspects. Quality of life has also been measured as subjective quality of life, also referred to as subjective well-being. That is the self-assessed well-being. And most often survey participants or populations are being asked about their satisfaction with life or happiness. And actually, I don't know what happened to this slide, because there should also be, and I'm not sure. Oh, there we go. It has a little bit of action there. I think I lost my slides. Okay, does the screen still show okay? Thumbs up, yes, okay. So there are 3 ways to measure quality of life, and I'm sure that if we go deeper into other disciplines such as psychology, more of this is being discussed. But generally speaking, there's happiness, that's the affective measure of well-being, satisfaction with life, this is an evaluative measure, and eudaimonic measures such as worthwhileness. In this study, we're focusing on happiness and satisfaction with life, this being the affective and a cognitive measure of well-being. How has subjective well-being in older population been measured before, or what is the relationship between the two? Subjective well-being, some studies say that subjective well-being doesn't change or slightly increases in older age, so that people maintain the well-being that they have throughout their lifetime. Others say that subjective well-being is U-shaped over the life course, so that would mean that it increases in older age and it's higher in the older and younger age, with a dip in midlife. Other studies find that subjective well-being indeed decreases in older age, but only in some countries, and in others it has that U-shaped relationship. Then that would happen in more affluent and most often English-speaking countries. Subjective well-being U-shaped until the age of 75, with a steep decrease after the age of 75. And these are studies that look more into what happens really past the age of 65, rather than just collapsing that population into one older population group. Active aging has been defined, has been discussed in different ways in the literature. We also find in there a mix of terminology, such as successful aging, productive aging, healthy aging, as well as positive aging, affluent aging, robust aging. Each of them add their own detail, but overall, sometimes they're used as replaceable, and other times one term would interact with the other, would complement the other. Again, the WHO, the World Health Organization, defines that active refers to continuing participation in social, economic, cultural, spiritual, and civic affairs, not just the ability to be physically active or to participate in labor force, which is what often, that sense that is often made of active aging. Active aging would immediately be, meaning you are engaged on the labor force, but there is much more to that. We looked at some theories that support active aging. So we have engagement theory versus disengagement theory, which means remaining active in later life. It points to the fact that remaining active in later life goes hand in hand with higher quality of life, and older people are happier when they are actively engaged and they preserve multiple social interactions. There's also role theory that points to 3 psychological mechanisms: accumulation of positive effects of performing several roles, each of them contributing to the increasing of well-being; buffering, then that positive outcomes of satisfactory roles buffer the negative feelings caused by unsatisfactory roles; and spillover effect, in that satisfaction with one role enhances the experiences with the others. Other theories talk about continuity, that is preserving and maintaining internal and external structures by applying familiar strategies in familiar areas. So that would be moving strategies that one would have during midlife and apply, for example, at work, into some areas that they engage with in older age. There is also the needs-based theory that underline competence, autonomy, and relatedness as the 3 psychological needs important for well-being. and that the satisfaction of these three needs requires more than just one activity. So based on this, on these theories, on the mix of theories, we hypothesized that subjective well-being is not related with a sole activity, but with the whole portfolio of individual activities. So we went on to measure active aging with available data, which I will talk about. This is based on European data through 5 activities, which is employment, volunteering, civic political participation, caring for children or a sick relative, and housework. And we measured in 2 ways, with separate variables and with a mix of activities. We clustered the activities into 3 and obtained housekeeper category, care provider category, and engage outside of home category. This was done through cluster analysis. So with these 3 clusters, we conducted one range of analysis using this mix of activities, and in parallel with this, the same analysis but with the separate variables to understand how the 2 analyses are different. We had 3 hypotheses based on the theories, and these are the composite measures of active aging are better predictors of subjective well-being than the separate measures of activities. Just as it was discussed, I discussed it a little bit earlier based on our theory. The second hypothesis is that individuals engaging in productive outside home activities such as employment or volunteering have higher levels of life satisfaction and higher levels of happiness than counterparts who engage in other types of activities, with a note of what do measures of satisfaction capture as compared to measures of happiness, the cognitive versus that affective measure of well-being. And the third hypothesis, that caring activities are more likely to be associated with life satisfaction than happiness in later life, because they would be probably giving you a high level of self, that you're using your time as in a useful way, so you're satisfied with what you are doing, but perhaps it might affect happiness because there might not be entirely pleasant activities such as caring for a sick relative. So this being our hypothesis, the data that we use comes from the European Quality of Life Survey, the latest round, available in 2016, from 2016. 27 countries, 13,622 individual cases. We employed multi-level regression models, as I explained just then. And in the econometry model, we had life satisfaction and happiness as the dependent variables, and a range of independent variables such as active aging, as described in the 2 different approaches, control variables, age, sex, education, marital status, whether they're migrant, ageism in the country, because this would be different because we're looking at European level, where countries would be very different culturally, and the level of economic development. This is what we looked at, the level of life satisfaction and happiness across countries, and we found that the relationship between the 2 is differs. So for some countries, life satisfaction and happiness are relatively equal. So people assess the 2 relatively on the same level. For example, in countries like Belgium, Netherlands, Estonia, while in other countries life satisfaction is much higher, happiness is much higher than life satisfaction, and it should be countries like France, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, Germany, Spain being the leader in this. This is a first indication that the 2 measures do seem to capture different aspects across Europe. So it's not necessarily just the difference that the theory tells us between the cognitive and the affective measure, but also this will be different across different cultures and across different societies. And this is important because we're also looking here at policy implications around active aging. So we need to understand what works under different circumstances in each society. How do the Latin class membership differ by country? We can see that, so this was ordered by housekeeper. There are countries where almost, as much as 70 to 80% of all the population are housekeepers, so they not engage in any activities other than those around their home. While so this would be countries, for example, so in the bottom half, such as from Poland down, with Bulgaria being at the extreme, Bulgaria and Hungary with about 80% or over 80%, and very little engagement outside home. While at the other end of the spectrum, there are countries where people are less bounded to activities at home and engage more in caring activities and outside home in employment. To be noted here is countries like Spain and Cyprus, Cyprus, Malta, that people are more likely to be engaged outside home. And these are also countries where happiness was much higher than life satisfaction. So this was an interesting, if you just look at this and compare the two descriptives. But we go on with the analysis, and so this shows our multi-level regression models. So we have two models for each dependent variable. So two models for life satisfaction and two for happiness. In model one, we included the latent classes. So we saw what was the difference between those who are engaged outside home and those who are care providers, as opposed to those who are only engaging around the house, the housekeepers, homekeepers. Versus in model two, we did not include the class analysis, but the separate individual level variables that point to activities such as being employed, volunteering, doing housework, caring for housework, caring for a child or grandchild, and looking after sick or disabled. So what we find from here is that engagement outside home has positive effect on life satisfaction, but not on happiness. That care provision has positive effect on both life satisfaction and happiness. But with a note that those who are caring for grandchildren are happier and more satisfied with life than those who are caring for a sick or disabled person, which was to be expected. So the positive effect in those cumulative measures for being a care provider is driven by being a carer for grandchildren. Employment and volunteering involve both measures, improve both measures of subjective well-being. So improve both life satisfaction and happiness. Looking at the statistical levels of significance, it shows that that R2 square, it shows that the cumulative measures, the models that use cumulative measures, are better econometric models than those who use separate variables. Finding further support for those theories and that definition of WHO that emphasize the need to look at clusters of activities rather than individual activities as adding to quality of life at later stages of life. Also because of, as theory tells us, about those spillover effects that we expect and the interaction between the various activities. Are there any questions so far, or should I continue with the discussion of our findings?
So I think Junao has a question, yes. Junao? Okay. So Junao asks, how did you define the latent classes?
Sorry?
How did you define the latent classes?
So we did latent class analysis, which is a statistical technique. So we included the 5 type of activities that people engage with. And through this analysis, it told us how individuals who engage in different type of analysis cluster into groups. So we found that one group engaged more intensively into activities at home and not as much into other activities, but still engaging into other activities, but not as at the same level as other people. So those became the class that are defined as the homekeepers. They are the ones who engage more at home. Then another group pointed towards individuals who, although they engage in various types of activities, it is the outside of home engagement that took over. So it had a higher factor in there for those people. So those were clustered into the second group, and the same for the third one, being carers. So for this pressure, the LCA, latent class analysis.
So I was more interested in just like, is there a model that guides this clustering? Like, is there a method that guides how do we cluster into these groups?
So this builds on the work of my co-author with someone else. So they worked, and I'm not sure where they are with the publishing of this of the paper on these clusters. But yeah, so that they use so this technique is can be conducted through statistical packages. So they used Stata to conduct this analysis, and there are a number of specifications that you can put in the model. And Stata somehow gives you out the latent classes together with a series of statistical significance for each group that would tell you, how the population is grouped in this.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that sounds good.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really sorry that my co-author can't be here to explain more about their work, but I'm sure that if I ask her, she can provide more information about the latent classes.
Do you know, did you have another question as well? Or was that? Because then Craig has a question. So what was the measure for economic development?
The measure for economic development, we had GDP, and we took a natural logarithm of the GDP. So we measured this at country level. And we had a few country level variables in the model, which was the level of economic development, the natural logarithm of GDP, and ageism. So, that's attitude towards older people.
Which does not seem to be.
Yes, Inka. So my second question was, based on which indicators are we talking about better econometric models? I didn't follow that part particularly well.
So down here, if you can see the slide that I'm sharing, you have a 1R square and R2 square. So that's R2 square shows the level of fit of the model. So it shows that so if we're looking at life satisfaction, model 1 has 0.708 and model 2 has 0.633. So this shows us that model
Unknown
1
participant is now exiting.
Is showing us that model 1 is a better model because it has a better fit. So the closer to 1, these indicators, the better they are, because it shows to what proportion, to what extent can this model explain the variations in the dependent variable. So the first model explains 70%, while the second model 63%.
Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. I think that's it for the questions for now. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then we'll go on with the findings and how these this fit back into our hypothesis. So the first hypothesis. So we were keen to understand if the cumulative model, the one using the latent class analysis, is better predictor than the the model with distinct variables, and we found support for that, what we just said now. So we confirmed our first hypothesis. We also found that happiness and life satisfaction in older age differ greatly across and within countries in Europe, and the message from here is that it is important to distinguish between the two, that is life satisfaction and happiness, when we discuss quality of life and aging, because while these are often very important, this is a very important distinction in, say, in psychology, often in social sciences, you find that the two are used interchangeably, or they're used based on the data that is available. So some national data sets collect data about life satisfaction, others about happiness, and studies just report on, this is what we found that is the effect of aging on quality of life or on subjective well-being. And some of them are measuring happiness, others are measuring life satisfaction. So it's important to distinguish between the two. In supporting our second and third hypothesis, we found that happiness and life satisfaction are affected differently by the types of activities in which older people engage. People who engage outside home are significantly more satisfied with life than the homekeepers, but they're not happier. So it only supported our second hypothesis partially. We were expecting that being outside home and engaging with various people, it will improve the social networks potentially, or the social connections, and improve happiness. But as theory would suggest, but this is not the case, suggesting that perhaps people become satisfied because they get that feeling of being productive outside the home, but they might be engaging in activities that actually don't make them happier. So the experience is not all that positive. Another finding is that being a carer has a positive effect on both happiness and life satisfaction, which was expected to a certain extent, like we were expecting that, but by looking at that analysis by variables, by different activities, we understood that it's actually the caring for grandchildren that drives this, rather than caring for other adults. Even caring for adults, it might increase a little bit the life satisfaction, we thought, but it did not work in that direction. The conclusions from here are that we found support for need for competence, need for autonomy, need for relatedness, or the basic psychological needs that we included in our theory. We found that life satisfaction is a function of need satisfaction, and that's supported by need-based theories. And being engaged in work or care has positive effects on life satisfaction, but also happiness. Home-based activities and caring activities affect happiness, and there are substitution mechanisms at work there. Substitution of activities in older age may lead to happier lives. So it is important to understand in older life how you can replace things that you can no longer engage with to maintain that level of well-being. Further investigation that we would like to see is how these changes happen or occur in different stages of life. So as people turn 70 or 75 even, because we know that that is becoming a different population on its own. What are the variations across countries in that motivation, activity, well-being relationship? And this will be particularly important for policy formulation. And as we've seen, countries are different across Europe. It might be that one policy would not fit all countries. Some of our limitations include data. Perhaps we would have wanted a little bit more information on the types of activities, and only 5 activities were available. And we would see the need for qualitative data to further understand the effects of this engaging in these activities for older people. Thank you very much. And I know that I've taken a first lot of questions, but if you have further questions or suggestions for, for improving our work or for further study, I open the floor to you.
So far, no questions in the chat, but I would have one question. So how do the self-employed fit into this concept? Especially also if, so that would they, or do they count as employed, or is housekeeping related to where they work, or also more of the activities that they do?
Sorry, how is self-employment related to this?
Yeah.
So that be those who work in their own businesses. I think this falls under employment, because you would still be in the category of paid employment.
Okay.
While working around the house is just chores. It's just, maintenance of the house type of work.
Yeah. So Anthony has a question. He says, all right, the differences in engagement outside the home seems to relate a little bit to COVID deaths, particularly Spain high and Germany low. Possible? Question mark. Anthony, do you want to?
Well, sorry, yeah, thank you. I mean, it was just, I'm sorry, the slide went past quite quickly. It was earlier on about engagement outside the home. But presumably, the more engaged you're outside the home, the more exposed you would be to viruses circulating. And one of the puzzles in the COVID deaths is that Germany is so low, and Spain, Italy, France, and the UK quite high. If that explains some of the differences, it has quite a lot to say about lockdown methods, etc. It's the slide or two before here, the one shown now.
Sorry.
The horizontal bars.
Is it this one?
That one, yeah. So Spain, Germany is very low, and Denmark is low, and I think they're both quite low on the scales. Cyprus is quite low as well. But anyway, if you did a correlation on death rates and it turned out to be helpful, you would it would be quite useful in the current absence of data.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I didn't even think about it. Well, I should have really. Because clearly all the people would be going out more if they were engaging with us at home more. Yeah, that's very interesting, and it's countries like Spain are very high on being engaged outside home, and we know the rates of
very high
of the virus there. And I was looking at Italy as well. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, we might have a look at that. I mean, I don't know how much we can add in our paper, but it can always serve us for more investigation. Now, that's very interesting. Thank you.
So George has a question. George.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to ask about caring for grandchildren, if you can be a bit more specific about what exactly the question is in that sort of way that you're using. Is it just yes or no, or are there any sort of more details?
Yeah, I think there is the generic question of do you care for do you care for someone, and then with their child, grandchild, partner, or I think that from memory these are the categories, but I'll have to check, because probably, and I don't know if that's where you're aiming, that the level of care would also have the intensity of care would also have a role to play in how that impacts their well-being. For example, if a grandparent cares for their grandchildren for, say, 1 day a week or 2 days a week versus every day. But I think the intensity of care was not included, so this would be one of the data limitations, but I am not 100% sure, so I will check. Would there be other questions?
Yeah, Craig had a follow-up on Anthony's comment on COVID, because he said that, well, the death rate will probably be sensitive to healthcare system capacity as well. And Saman had a question on, well, first of all, she thanked you for this amazing talk, and she also would like to know a bit more on how did you calculate the composite measure of active aging?
How did I calculate?
The composite measure of active aging.
So the composite measure of active aging was through that latent class analysis. So we combined the 5 categories using Stata as the software and the LCA command. So there are a whole range of statistics on how those activities interact to split the population into groups. So they were all classified into one of the 3 groups, given a dummy variable nearly, or, a 1, 2, or 3. And then the analysis continued with those classes.
Thank you so much. I think I misunderstood, because I thought that for the composite measure, you actually come up with the summary measure of those 5 groups of variables. But now I understand that you put all of those 5 groups of variable in the model and come up with the trajectories in a way.
Exactly, yes. So the Stata, the statistical package, showed us how the population groups through 3 types of people, depending on the activities in which they engage. And one group was more inclined towards outside of home activities, one inside the home, and one in caring. The other activities, so that's to say that, so those who engage in caring activities, it doesn't mean that they had no housework or no engagement outside work, but those were less than that's caring activity for them. So the caring activity was the main. So that's how the groups were defined and then taken forward in the analysis.
Thank you.
Yes.
Then I would have another question. So I'm not that familiar with the well-being and the distinction between life satisfaction and happiness, but as a policy maker, what should they focus on if they now, as you said, there are, well, substitutes, complements of activities that they can encourage people to do to be, well, should people be more happy or more satisfied with their lives? Ideally,
yeah. That's a very good question. I think we all looked at New Zealand, where they had the, well-being driven budget and well-being driven policy. There are different ways to measure well-being, and as we've seen, but I think the idea is to measure it in both ways, if you are to consider just happiness and life satisfaction, because happiness would probably be much strongly related to measures of mental health. So that would be important for your population. So there would be indicators that policymakers can use to inform their policies, and these indicators would talk about happiness or life satisfaction. So for now, indicators of well-being that are used come from different spheres. So, how well are we achieving in education, in work, in housing, in health, and then how satisfied or how happy people are. So they're both included. I for one think that at the moment there's an inclination to use life satisfaction, also because it's being asked satisfaction with different areas of life. So it gives that grain of detail to how satisfaction is measured, and then satisfaction with life overall. But there is plenty of literature supporting the need for happiness, and I agree with that, because we can see that people can be satisfied with their life, but they might be unhappy. And why? We need to understand, who is that group, and why is it that they're unhappy despite saying that they're super satisfied. So both measures are important because they capture different aspects, even though they both fall under that subjective well-being.
Yeah, which I mean, you also saw in the country bars, right? So that there seems to be different countries focus on different things, or people focus on different things.
And I think we often find that, and you know, it deviates a little bit from the discussion of older people, so it applies to everyone. We find that people say they're satisfied with their jobs, they're satisfied with their, or they have achievements in their jobs, they have achievement in personal life, but they are depressed and they are severely unhappy. And you wouldn't be able to pick up that if you're asking them how satisfied are they with their jobs, because that wouldn't pinpoint what's wrong. So there would be a need for more measures in that direction. So, you know, to capture that effective measure of well-being, and it usually starts with measures of mental health, and then happiness.
Oh, thank you. There are no more questions in the chat, so I thank you very much for this interesting talk. Different from what we usually do, but I mean, this was, I think, the first one that we had on aging, actually. So I think it's still a great turnout for people, and we're looking forward to expand our scope of the seminar series. That's why we are really happy. So Hazel and I are really happy that you volunteered to present already. I mean, later in the year, but also already now.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. I know that, you know, having seen the schedule and what other presentations are about, I knew that, you know, we come from a different perspective from social sciences on this. So I thank you very much for the opportunity and for the constructive talk that I managed to have today with the participants.
Thank you. Great, then, well, that is the closure of today's seminar. I only have one more thing to do. So next, in 2 weeks, we have Brooke Brady, which is a psychologist. So again, a bit more of the multidisciplinary road that we're going. But thank you again, Ioana, and thank you everybody for being here and taking the time and asking questions. Thank you.
Thank you.